So last week we left Paul being torn apart. He wasn't having a good day in the Sanhedrin. And this week we're going to pick up with the story just after that. And we'll go ahead and start it on the slides. And so we pick up with Paul and fast food. Alright? What I want you to think about here is not fast food, but fasting from food. Alright? So the picture just getting you thinking fasting from food. After Paul was taken back to jail, there were a group of 40 guys who said, "This is taking too long for justice. I want justice now." And so 40 guys said, "We're not going to eat or drink until Paul is dead." Kind of an aggressive approach to take. So they have done that. They decided no eat, no drink until Paul is dead. They tell the guys from the Sanhedrin, the elders and the chief priests, said, "Have Paul come down again. Say you need to question them. And we'll take care of this problem." Plot thickens, right? Now, along with the plot, we have, the silhouette, the guy listening here. That's Paul's nephew. Paul's nephew hears of the plot, of what's being planned here. And his nephew goes to Paul and says, "There's 40 guys that want to kill you." And Paul says, "That's something that's kind of good for others to know." So they go and tell the commander of the troops what the plan is. Plot thickens on the next slide. The commander of the troops says it's time to take action. So remember, the commander of the fortress has about 1,000 troops under his care. He sends almost half of them to protect Paul on the way to Caesarea. Caesarea is sort of an administrative capital. It's where the governor is. And so they're sending out 200 infantry, 200 spearmen, and 70 cavalry. That's not bad for protection of a prisoner, 470 guys to protect one. Lysias, the commander, he sends a classy letter along with them. He says, "I don't think this guy's guilty. Maybe he's guilty of Jewish law. I don't understand what the Jewish law is. I really have no idea." But he says, he's innocent, and he's also a Roman citizen, so I've done really well to protect this guy. Which is a lie. Remember, Lysias was about ready to torture him last week, and then found out he's a Roman citizen? Well, in the letter, he tells the governor, "I know he's a Roman citizen, so I've been doing really good to protect him." All right? So at 9 p.m., Lysias sends out his 470 guys. They hike 35 miles through Judea. Judea is hilly country, and 35 miles is a pretty aggressive hike. They hike to Antipatris. So this is Jewish territory, kind of dangerous place for Paul. And then at that point, 400 guys return, and there's another 70 that continue on. The cavalry continue on with Paul. 62 miles to hike. Now, Paul, he was put on a mount. He didn't have to walk it. But that's pretty aggressive. All right, so that's part of the story. Now we'll go on the next slide. Paul comes before Felix, and there's always two sides to any court case, right? So Paul is there to present his side, and the Jews come to present their side. They have Ananias, the chief priest, some elders, and they bring a lawyer with them. The lawyer is pretty aggressive. He says there's 3 charges. One is Paul is stirring up riots. Second, he's a Christian. And third is Paul profaned the temple. Paul refutes the first and third charges, and those are kind of serious, especially the first one. The first one breaks Roman law. Starting riots, Romans didn't like disorder. So that wasn't going to go well for him. He refutes that pretty well. Third one, profaning the temple, once again, he stands up and he says, that's not true. Come on, guys. But the second one, the fact that he's a Christian ringleader, he confesses that one. We pick up the story in Acts chapter 24, verse 20. It's page 791 in the Pew Bibles. Acts chapter 24, verse 20. This is Paul speaking. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin. Unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence, it is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial before you today. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. When Lysias the commander comes, he said, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. He sent for Paul to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus, as Paul discoursed on righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Felix was afraid and said, that's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you. At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. All right. We learned something about Felix and justice. He keeps Paul in custody for two reasons. One is an emoticon, right? He wants to keep the Jews happy. Figures, I let this guy stay in jail. It keeps some people happy. That has political importance. So that works out well. And then on the other hand, he's also looking for a bribe from Paul. He figures Paul can raise money for churches. Paul can raise money from his wealthy family. He can raise money for me. I'm waiting for my gift. This gives us an idea of what Felix is like. And I want to give you a little bit more. There's more about Felix on the next slide, in which we get a sense of who this guy really is. He was essentially the governor of Judea from 52 to 59. Not because he was really good, but because his brother was in the power circle in Rome. Actually, Felix was pretty inept, but his brother got him a pretty cushy good job. And so he shows up, and a Roman historian records him in this way. With savagery, he exercised the powers of a king with the disposition of a slave. He was not a nice man. Even for Roman standards, he was brutal in putting down insurrections. Brutal in dealing with the conflict between Jew and Gentile. In fact, he was so brutal it just made more violence. It's sort of like a Mideast newsreel, right? Violence, more violence, violence, more violence. He was not a nice man. In fact, the Romans fired him. They said, enough of you, you're coming back. And once again, fortunately, he had a brother in the power circle, and so he lost his job, but he didn't lose his head. One other interesting thing about Felix, he was not very good politically. He's able to marry well. Over time, he married 3 different princesses. And the last one, the one that is here in this story, is Drusilla, who is one of the Herod family. You know, Herod the Great, she's tied in with that family. Felix met her one time and was enchanted with her beauty. Unfortunately, she was married. So he got this magician from Cyprus to help him kind of deceptively work out a divorce for her from her lesser king. And then he married her when she was the ripe old age of 16. All right, so, we've got these things all going on. This is the kind of guy we got with Felix and Drusilla. This plot line has an important impact on us. But first, I want to go to intermission. Because today's sermon is bold and spicy. And I've asked 2 volunteers to help me with bold and spicy. This bag in the refrigerator, can you get that for me? This is going to separate boys from men, all right? And we're going to have a little bold and spicy, and this is going to be an important object lesson to help us think about this story and apply it. All right, so Josiah and Seth, come on up. You will each have a turn. Seth will go first. All right? Bring it on in, Sam. All right, don't look. You guys, make sure you don't look in the bag. You'll spoil them. All right. Now, oops, I don't want to go that far. So what's going to happen is you will have a food of differing levels of spiciness, and I want you to say what the food is. Oops. Ooh. Can I cut circulation off to your eyes? All right. This is the first item. All right. Open wide, and you'll have a big surprise. Oh, you don't like cheese curls. Oh, I forgot. Do you have a guess of what that is? No. It is a jalapeno popper cheese curl. Your new favorite, apparently. Okay. I think you'll enjoy this one much more. Okay. This is the next one. All right. I'm making it. All right. Pop it right in. You like saltines. Pop it in, pop it in, pop it in.
Oh, good.
You know this one.
Academic.
Close. One more guess?
Sweet. Hot sauce mixed with jam.
Okay, take off your...
Now,
Sriracha. Oh, one of my favorites. It's a Vietnamese Thai sort of hot sauce. Interesting, the company that makes this has been sued by the town that they're in because of the odors affecting over 30 people and complaining about the smell of the hot peppers affecting them. You did well. All right. All right. Don the apparel. You can sit and observe your compatriot if you want, or you can grab a drink if you want. Okay. Now again, these are varying levels of spiciness. All right?
well, that's encouraging.
Just so you know, I broke the bank on this one.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I feel honored.
Okay, this is on a fork, so I will put the fork in your hand. All right, don't smell it. You just want to...
Which way's the fork?
It's pointing towards you.
Okay. That would be unfortunate.
Mmm.
Did you
Mmm.
really do that to me?
Do you feel the spiciness?
Not really.
Do you have a guess of what it is?
Did you just give me spam?
Okay. One last one. All right.
Yeah, you really broke the bank with that last one.
All right. You'll enjoy this.
Oh boy.
All right. It's on a saltine.
Is it?
Yes, and it's not spam.
It's not spam?
No.
So I was correct.
Yes, you were correct. You were on the money.
before.
You know that one.
Do I?
Yes. You've had it before.
Is it that jalapeno salsa?
Close. It is the ghost pepper salsa. Ghost pepper is the hottest naturally grown pepper in the world. And it's a wonderful salsa. Spicier than Spam?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Outstanding. Oh, these contestants deserve a round of applause. Well done. All right, and so afterwards, if you want a sampling of these fine foods, you would be welcome to partake.
You did that on purpose. You just wanted to get me into Spam, didn't you?
I think Josiah will probably share his Spam afterwards. Just like with foods, there are varying levels of boldness and spiciness. In this story, we see various levels of boldness. I want to go through different characters in this. First, we have Paul's nephew, a cheese curl, if you will, in which he is an advocate for his uncle. Think about how bold this needed to be. Paul is hated, not only by people around in Jerusalem, probably by his own family. There's probably a bunch of people in Paul's family that are like, black sheep, no thank you. And his nephew stands up, risks his own life by standing up for Paul and being an advocate for him. Many of you, I would dare say all of you, are an advocate for people at some point in time. And quite often it's our own family. Maybe an advocate for someone who's made a mistake. Maybe it's an advocate for someone who has special needs. Maybe it's an advocate for someone who is down. Maybe it's an advocate for someone who just needs encouragement. Each one of us has that role. Each one of us has an opportunity to be an advocate. And you are the kind of advocate. Keep going with that. I want to encourage you as you continue to strive to be an advocate for other people, much the same as Paul's nephew. Live bold. Next one. We come to Lysias. Now, this is a guy who did his job overall well. He had that lying issue. And let's not pull any punches. He's not claimed to be a Christian in this passage. It doesn't say that he came to know Christ. But it is clear that God used him. He was faithful in doing his job, and he was a part of God's bigger plan. Because he did the right thing at the right time. He sent out those 470 guys to protect a criminal who really made no difference to him, but is the right thing at the right time. Each one of us have a job. Whether it's going to the farm, whether it's going to an office, whether it's going to the plant, whether it's going to the store, whether it's going to school, whether it's going in our homes, each one of us have jobs to do. And the question that each one of us faces is, will we do the right thing at the right time? And you do. I want to continue encouraging you to be bold in how you do your work, how you do your jobs. You are doing the right thing. Keep striving to do that. Keep striving to see needs around you. Keep striving to stand up and not just be mediocre at work, but to do the right thing. Keep going. The third characters in the story were the Spam characters, right? Felix and Drusilla. What a letdown. What a letdown in the story of. We're told that they knew the way. Felix was able to say, you know what? I know that Paul's not that guilty. I'm not worried about it because I understand this way thing. I understand this Jesus deal. It's no big deal. He knew about it, but he didn't know Jesus. The way is an interesting phrase. On the one hand, like in John chapter 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The way is the way of salvation. The way is accepting Jesus Christ, accepting his forgiveness. there is also the way of life that flows from that. Psalm 1, verses 1 through 2 talks about how we live our lives because of our love for God. We live our lives according to God's law because we want to. Because it's a way of life for us once we've accepted Christ. Felix and Drusilla had a tremendous opportunity to make that commitment, to live a bold life. And they chose spam, right? They were kind of shrugged their shoulders. On this slide, you see Paul came back time and time again because they were interested, they were nervous about this teaching. But Paul talked about three things. We're told to talk about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Righteousness. From Paul's other writings, we know that righteousness, on the one hand, is a gift. When we say, Jesus Christ is my leader and my forgiver, the righteousness, the right standing before God, or our rightness in relationship with God, is imputed. Isn't that a great word? I'd like to drop that on Scrabble. Imputed. It's given to us. It's placed on us. When we say Jesus Christ is my Savior, when God looks at me, he doesn't say, oh, that's Carl Green, and I can see his sin from 6 hours ago. When God looks at me, he sees the righteousness of Jesus Christ because I have accepted Jesus. Jesus is a part of me. And God looks at me and he sees this imputed righteousness. But righteousness is also something that comes from within. We're transformed by Jesus. We're not the same person we were before we came to know Jesus. We start to live life differently. We can't help but make decisions that honor God. So Paul's talking about righteousness with Felix and Drusilla. He talks about self-control. How about talking about self-control with these two? You know? A guy who's, wife shopping all over the place, and a wife who is from Herod's family, not exactly the bastion of self-control. And Paul says, if you truly know the way, your life is going to be different. You'll live by self-control. And then the last thing that Paul talks about is the judgment to come. It's kind of the clincher of the whole deal here. Paul says there's no fence sitting. You're either in or you're out. Don't just say, well, I know about the way. You've got to decide. Are you going to walk in the way or are you not? You can't sit on the fence and just kind of hedge your bets. You're either in or you're out. There's a day coming in which judgment is going to happen for eternity. Where are you going to be? That's kind of a good barn burner for Paul to kind of end with of, keep thinking. Talk about bold, though. They had the opportunity to live boldly and they missed it. And on the next slide, this talks about opportunity that we have, that we take, an opportunity to make Christ-like decisions, an opportunity to really think about what it means to follow Jesus. And I know that you do that. You think about, well, what's it mean that I follow Jesus? What am I going to do in this situation? Those are hard decisions. But it's pretty impressive that those are things they wrestle with. Thank you for wrestling with those. Keep going with that. On the next slide, we have Paul. Paul is bold and spicy all the way through, right? He brings words. This is Ghost Pepper Paul here. He's got the words of encouragement, and he's saying what he thinks, but it's bridled. He says what God wants him to say. And that's a difficult balance for us. I think sometimes we're like, I'm ready to be bold, and I'm ready to tell somebody what I think the whole way through. And blam! There's an edginess to boldness that goes too far. We need to be bridled. And on the other hand, we can feel like it's just not the right time to be bold. I'll wait for some time in like 40 years, and maybe that'll be a good time. Paul gave some advice to a young pastor named Timothy. He said, preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. Be ready to bring the message in season and out of season, when you feel like it, when you don't feel like it, but make sure it's bridled with patience and careful instruction. Boldness with words can be tricky. But you do it well. Keep going with that. Continue wrestling with what does it mean to be bold and talking about Jesus, and at the same time with patience and careful instruction. On the last slide, one of my favorite verses. Saying a favorite verse is always kind of cool. I mean, as if, you can't say favorite verse of every verse in the Bible, but one of my favorites is, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Living boldly is tiring. Living boldly causes drooping hands and weak knees. Living boldly as an advocate. Living boldly at work. Living boldly in how we live. Living boldly with our words can be very tiring. Keep going.